I'm Julie Saunders.
I'm Jan Wilson. Julie and I both have experience as school librarians, and we've worked together as district library leaders.
In each episode, we'll dive into our profession with interviews and meaningful content to inspire you.
The ideas and opinions shared by any host, guest, or listener are their own and do not represent those of any respective school district.
Welcome to Library Exchange.
This episode is sponsored by Mackin. For over 40 years, Mackin has provided pre-K through 12th grade libraries and classrooms with access to over 4 million printed and digital fiction and nonfiction titles.
The 26-time multi-award-winning digital content management system, Mackin Via, along with divisions Mackin Library, Mackin Classroom, Mackin Maker, Mackin Learning, and the brand new whole school resource management system, Mackin Vision, help to create a truly unique and robust educational resource company that schools and educators have relied on year after year.
For more information, visit mackin.com today. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're here. Today, we are addressing a topic that every school librarian thinks about and deals with, showing our impact on student achievement.
Right. It's the ultimate school library challenge. But today's guest literally wrote the book and the studies on this. Our guest today is Dr. Keith Curry Lance, a renowned sociologist and consultant.
Librarians, if his name rings a bell, it's because you've seen his decades of library research published in School Library Journal, Phi Delta Kappan, and the Peabody Journal of Education, just to name a few.
Most recently, his research was featured in the article, The Librarian Effect on Literacy, in the April issue of School Library Journal. We are thrilled to have you on the podcast today. Welcome to Library Exchange, Keith.
Thank you, Julie and Jan. I'm delighted to be with you.
So, Keith, with your background in sociology, what led you to research the impact of school libraries?
Well, I'm one of those people who did not have the career he intended to. Instead of me choosing my career, it chose me. I got a master's and a doctorate in sociology, expecting to be a sociology professor in a university. And that just didn't happen. Instead, I ended up with a job at the Colorado State Library. And even that had took an improbable course, because I was hired for a 2-year temporary job to do the long-range plan for library development for Colorado back in the mid-'80s. And so by 87, 88 at the latest, I was supposed to be out of a job. I finished that planning project, and by then we had a new state librarian, and I was delighted with her. Her name was Nancy Bolt, and I stepped into her office one day and I said, Nancy, I'm just delighted you're our new state librarian, but I'm really kind of sad that I am not going to get to work with you that long, because at that point I had about 6 months left on my 2 years. And she just looked at me like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, my job's over at the end of June. And she said, oh, don't be silly. She said, yeah, that project's over, but we need the stuff you do, the data work and the research work. We're going to need that for, forever. So, your job's not going anywhere.
Yay.
So my 2-year job turned into a 22-year job that I retired from.
Wow.
I'm doing my bit to hold down the average number of career changes per person.
Great.
That's very lucky for our profession that you stayed where you did. So I'm going to go back to 2007 for a second. You were interviewed for an article in School Library Journal, and in it you discussed the importance of the role of librarians in leadership.
Mm-hmm.
I recently read it again, and honestly, it's just as relevant today as it was then. Will you share your thoughts on librarians and leadership in schools?
Well, at the time that was all happening, and I was beginning to do the state level studies, there was a set of standards for school libraries from AASL, and it had 3 themes. In order, they were collaboration, leadership, and technology.
Mm-hmm.
So we framed the second Colorado study in terms of those themes. And what we found, interestingly, was that leadership was sort of the prime mover. Collaboration shouldn't be in first place, it should be in second place. Because if you want to be a collaborator with your principal and your teachers, you've got to get your foot in the door as a leader first. You need to be on your school leadership team. You need to meet with individual teachers and groups of teachers as often as you can. You need to meet individually with the principal. The librarian and the principal have something in common. They're in most schools, they're the only person in that job.
Right.
There's usually just one principal and one librarian. They need to be doing all of those things that establish them as leaders in their schools. And of course, it's very important for librarians to have the support of their principals, because the principal sort of sets the culture for the whole school. And you've got to win them over first. And then you have to win over the teachers. You're not going to get a lot accomplished if you're not working in collaboration with them. But in order to persuade them of the value of collaborating with you, you've got to prove yourself to them first. So that was what that and the statistical findings of the study were what led us to rearrange those themes from collaboration, leadership, and technology to leadership, collaboration, and technology.
So, Keith, you just talked about the three themes: collaboration, leadership, and technology. And I'm just wondering, that was the slogan from many years ago, early 2000s. And how do you feel about the word technology being one of those major themes in 2026, considering that now people are well versed in technology and education? Kids have one-to-one, they have the devices, they have the access from kindergarten through 12th grade. Teachers are trained in undergraduate to come in and through their pre-service learning, they already come in being pretty well versed on instructional technology tools. So would you still use that word technology as the third theme?
I would add the term integration. Technology integration is the role that librarians, I think, can play better than most anybody else. Most schools have a technology person. Their job is usually to keep the hardware and software going and keep the internet connection functioning at its highest capacity. That's not the librarian's job. Usually, their job is helping teachers use technology as a tool to improve their instruction, helping students use technology to improve their learning. That's how I think they can make a real difference with technology. Of all the things school librarians teach, I think the absolute most critical thing is information literacy. Some people debate what we're supposed to call it. Is it information literacy or digital literacy or news literacy or media literacy? I say, I don't care what you call it. It's critical thinking about information. And that doesn't even necessarily have to involve technology, but it's very important in technology, because if you do an AI search on Google these days, you can get completely wrong information. And if you look at the sources it's based on, they're all Facebook posts, which are, to say the least, not authoritative. Teaching people how to be critical thinkers about information is just incredibly important. And frankly, it's something we have to keep remembering ourselves.
Absolutely.
Everybody in the school library world. I have lots of retired school librarian friends on Facebook, and some of them post things that do not demonstrate a great capacity for critical thinking about information.
So knowing that you've answered with critical thinking at the forefront of your answer, with information and media literacy skills, or whatever you term it in your district, do you feel it's possible that you can teach these instructional strategies, you can teach those strategies for information literacy to students with or without the use of technology?
Absolutely. But I think because technology has become so ubiquitous, it's especially important to teach it in connection with technology, because far too many of us, and we all slip into doing it occasionally, believe anything we read online.
Right.
Yeah,
great. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And now a word from our sponsors.
Advancing Technology, Designing Spaces. Niswonger AV is your comprehensive K-12 education partner. With 50 years of expertise, they deliver innovative technology and strategic furniture solutions that transform learning environments.
Why choose Niswonger AV? It starts with cutting-edge AV technology and intelligent furniture design. Their value extends far beyond the products. They use a consultant-driven approach backed by a family-owned commitment to excellence.
Advancing technology and learning spaces with old-fashioned personal service, because your library deserves more. For a free design, call Niswonger today at 770-338-0335.
The role that librarians play, well, one of the many roles they play in relational technology, this probably the most critical one, in my estimation, is what I call the navigator role.
Right.
I think the navigator term is so appropriate for librarians. The librarian is the one who helps you use that technology to get wherever you need to go, to get whatever information you need.
So you're now a consultant to the Every Library Institute.
Yes.
What is the Every Library Institute, and will you share information about the SLIDE project with our listeners? What resources are found there? All about it.
Okay. We've got some really powerful data tools on the SLIDE website, and
Right.
they all have step-by-step prompts for using them. So you don't need a training session about them. It will literally train you as you go in doing a
Great.
search. And there's a profile for your state.
Right?
You can get a profile for your district. And one of my favorite features on the state profile, we have a map of every state by school district.
Ooh.
And for about 10 or 12 years worth of data, you click the start button and the map changes year by year. You see the districts that have and don't have librarians changing
Wow,
over
that's really
time.
cool.
It's really cool. I think it's a
Love it.
very
Love it.
powerful image. Okay. Back in 2018, School Library Journal asked Deborah Cockle and me, my partner in this research for many, many years now, they asked us to write a series of articles for School Library Journal about the status of school librarian employment. It was very educational, very depressing in some ways, to be frank, because we had a whole decade, the whole decade of the 2010s, when we were losing FTEs, what the federal government counts for us, full-time equivalents. We were losing FTEs at a truly alarming rate. In one decade, we lost 10,000 FTEs. So an average of
Whoa.
1,000 a year across the whole country. Well, there were fewer than 50,000 at the beginning of that decade. So you're losing 10,000 FTEs a decade. That doesn't look too good, does it? That makes
Right.
you feel a bit like an endangered profession. That happily did not continue. We had this little event in 2020 called COVID. And as you and everybody else who works in schools know, your world changed literally overnight with absolutely no warning. The whole world shut down overnight. And that turned out to be an incredible opportunity for a lot of school librarians, because especially if they were leaders in their schools, if they were plugged in all those ways we talked about a couple of minutes ago, and if they were good technology navigators, they were in a perfect position to assert themselves, be leaders, and help their schools survive that traumatic overnight change. And my belief is that is one of the two major reasons that the decline of school librarian FTEs leveled off
Right.
during the
Right.
early 2020s. We've been watching that for several years now. And the conclusion that Deb and I have come to, besides the one just mentioned, is that the other big factor that helped bring a halt to that long-term decline was the ESSER funding, the emergency school relief funding that Congress legislated and sent out to the states and the districts and schools nationwide. One of the things Deb did in her article for SLJ was she interviewed people all over the country about school librarianship, and she started collecting job titles. She started collecting a list. And out of 24, 25 job titles, you wouldn't believe how many of them did not have any version of the L word in them. My personal favorite was ET-IL, and then put whatever you want after that. Teacher, consultant, specialist, whatever. Or coordinator, educational technology hyphen information literacy.
Oh.
So we looked at those kind of job titles and thought, I wonder if the people reporting to NCES understood that that was a school librarian.
Right.
Who knows?
Yeah.
We hoped to find out in the interview stage of our project, which was the last one. We did this mostly in 2023. We interviewed superintendents and principals all over the country, 50 of them, and we heard really interesting things from them. Their decisions depended so much on their own previous experience of having or not having school librarians. Now, it wasn't the kind of connection where it was a correlation, because no matter what situation they came out of, they could either perpetuate it or react to it. We talked to people who had been in districts where every school had a librarian. It didn't occur to them there could be a school without a librarian. They moved to another state and they find themselves in a district where there's not a librarian in sight. And they couldn't imagine what was going on in these places. If they were in charge, they were the superintendent or principal. A great many of them decided this was one of their causes. We're going to get librarians back in these schools. Of course, that was a great thing. We were trying to get them to explain to us why they were making the decisions they were. When we would ask people, why did you cut librarians or eliminate them altogether? Inevitably, the first answer we would hear was, oh, we love our librarians, but we just didn't have enough money. Well, one of the things we did in the perspectives on school librarian employment report, the first big slide statistical publication, we looked at the trends on the employment of librarians, teachers, instructional coordinators, school administrators, and district administrators. And you know what? The strangest thing was going on. People were telling us, well, the reason the number of librarians is going down is because we don't have enough money. But while the number of librarians was going down, all four of those other categories were going up. So, like, well, how come you had enough money for these other positions, but not for librarians? Which is what led me to conclude, which I imagine most people would have anyway, even without strong evidence. Money is just a medium of communication. You know, how you decide to spend your money tells us what your priorities are.
Bingo.
And
Bingo.
what we learned from looking at these statistics and their trends for these 5 kinds of positions was school librarians were obviously not valued as highly as the other positions. Or perhaps, to be a little more charitable, perhaps if they weren't valued as much, maybe their job just wasn't understood well enough.
Right.
So when you only look at the national numbers of school librarians, frankly, a lot of years it's looked pretty depressing. But if you look at it state by state, it is unbelievably different from one state to another. What we found during the Slide Federal Project was that there's 15 to 20 states that mandate school librarians. It's not a decision for a superintendent or a principal to make. And somewhat surprisingly to many of us, most of those states are in the South. So they had the highest ratio of librarians to school buildings compared to other parts of the country, and particularly to my part of the country, the West. I do an article every year for the Library and Book Trade Almanac. It's the only thing they have about statistical information they have about school libraries. And it's about school librarian employment, of course. And what we do every year is for every state, we track how many districts gained staff, how many remained exactly the same, and how many lost staff. Like, virtually every state has some districts gaining and some districts losing every year.
Yeah.
And the vast majority report the same numbers.
Mm.
So it's a very fluid, very dynamic sort of situation that is masked very well if you just look at total state level numbers or, worst of all, just the national numbers. That's why I'm glad LBTA wants me to do that article every year, because I think it keeps reminding everybody this is it's a very divergent environment. It varies by state, it varies by district, and it's important to pay attention to that.
Very important.
So, Keith, what's next on your research plate?
I'm going to be doing for the Every Library Institute. I'm going to be doing an update of a study I did for SLJ back in 2011. Most of the school library impact studies are based on data from one snapshot in time.
Okay.
It's data from one school year. What Linda Hofshire, a colleague, and I, what we did for that SLJ study in 2011 was compare data over time. We looked at, for state by state, we looked at the change in the number of librarians over time and the change in the test scores over time. And what we wanted to see was, do test scores go up when the number of librarians goes up? And do test scores go down when the number of librarians goes down?
I don't know, does it?
And to some extent. It's not a perfect always one-to-one correlation, but the trend is absolutely in that direction. And we controlled for the things we always try to control for when we're doing this kind of statistical research. We want to compare for student demographics. We want to control for poverty, which is the 500-pound gorilla variable when it comes to test scores. People in education research, they seem to want to ignore it a lot, mainly because it's this great big colossal cause that they cannot control.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact of the matter is, and this is what we found in all of the very earliest impact studies we did, it's always the biggest factor. In fact, what was striking about the earliest studies is what we found again and again was that there were two things of all the things we had data on, there were two things you could count on having a measurable, independent impact on kids' test scores. It was whether their families are richer or poorer and whether or not they had a good school library.
Wow.
Aw,
Yeah.
I love that.
A lot of the research about this was done by a reading professor, reading scholar named Stephen Krashen, who was out in California. He's retired now, sadly, because he was doing yeoman work advocating for libraries, even though his field is reading. His belief is, and mine, is that school libraries are the great equalizer. Kids who come from, upper middle class, outright, wealthy homes, they've got all the books and magazines and newspapers and access to things on the internet that they could ever want.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true of kids whose families are more economically disadvantaged.
Right.
So the school library can really step in and make a big difference for them.
So, Keith, I just want to say it's been a total full circle moment for me to meet the man behind the studies. I think I speak for all of our listeners when I say we need you on our speed dial for advocacy backup. So, like the next time someone questions our role, we can just say, hold on, let me call Keith. Let me call Keith.
Well, the Every Library Institute is an allied organization of Every Library, which is the preeminent organization that advocates for libraries of all types, and particularly school and public libraries. They're the ones you should put on speed dial because they can really be a huge help to you. As a researcher, I try to maintain my independence because as a researcher, I need to be as objective as I can possibly be. So it's not appropriate for me to be an advocate, but I can certainly provide information about what our research has found.
So, Keith, we're going to make sure we include all the links to all those things. I know
Okay.
people will really want to refer to those. And just really want to thank you for your contributions to our profession. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Great to talk with you both.
Julie, I know we're supposed to say we've exchanged ideas. It's time for the recap. But I feel like this episode was more of a Keith Curry Lance masterclass, and I didn't have much to exchange.
And I'll be honest, I don't know if I feel qualified enough to do a recap on Keith. His work has literally shaped how we understand our role and how we understand the trends in librarianship. So one of the most important points Keith makes is that leadership comes first. In order to really gain the respect of your colleagues and to increase that perception of value for your role, you have to be seen as an instructional leader in your school. Another point that he made was about technology. And technology integration is still an important piece of the puzzle for librarianship and for us to model the use of appropriate instructional technology tools within our inquiry-based activities. I do believe that critical thinking skills should be emphasized in our library programming, events, and lessons with or without the use of technology.
Yes, I agree. I like that discussion. And when we spoke about the slide project, we had to do a little bit of editing, you guys, but SLIDE stands for School Librarian Investigation, Decline or Evolution. This project tracks staffing trends, data, etc. in school library programs, and it has infographics and some of the slide decks from their presentation. And I checked out that interactive data tool that Keith mentioned because you can select your specific state, Julie, and then hover over individual districts to see exact librarian staffing numbers. So you can see which districts currently have 0 librarians, unfortunately. And then lastly, there is a progression map that you can view so that you can watch the map change as it tracks librarian data since 2009. It is really easy to go down a rabbit hole here.
So, one of the most effective ways to advocate for the profession is to consistently demonstrate and communicate your impact on student learning. Help us all by being the best librarian you can be, so that collectively the perception is that no student should attend a school without quality library services.
So everyone, don't forget to check out libslide.org and keithcurrylance.com for more resources and to go down that rabbit hole like I did. Keith is knowledgeable and humble. I hope everyone enjoyed our conversation as much as we did. Thank you for tuning in.
Make sure to visit our website at www.libraryexchangepodcast.com.
You'll find episode notes and links. You can even submit your questions or inspiring stories that may be featured on the podcast.
If you're looking for some swag for your library or book-loving friends, visit libraryexchange.etsy.com.
That's a lot of URLs, so I'm glad you had to say all of that, Julie.
Thanks for joining us. We can't wait to have you back for our next episode of Library Exchange.